come and take your seats. Thank you very much. So before we start, I just wanted to say a few words about what we're doing here. Hi, everyone. Take your seats. Welcome. So, welcome to this workshop. This belongs to a series of one-time workshops that the eCrypt project is organizing. So, my name is Pascal Payet. I'm your host for the day. The goal, the purpose of today is actually to try to communicate between the crypto community and the standards world, because obviously there is some kind of gap here, and people in the crypto community very often, when you talk about standards with them, they tell you that everything is happening in their backs. They have no real, apart from the NIST competitions, they don't feel really involved in that process. For them, everything seems a little bit obscure and arcane. So today we wanted to put together a number of us who actually take part in standardization in cryptography, and have, just tried to create some kind of discussion. And there are several topics right now. Quantum safe crypto is one of them, because there is now this sense of rush about trying to standardize as fast as possible something to resist quantum computing. But there are plenty of other issues about crypto standards, like trust and this story about duality RBG, mechanisms that are submitted for inclusion into standards, and people in the crypto community are not maybe that confident about. So in a general sense, AWACS 2016 is this one-time workshop about all these issues. Maybe if this is a successful event, maybe we'll repeat that over time, and there will be other editions. But we're running out of time. So I think I should now leave the mic to Phil, who is going to give us this Keynote presentation, the first one of the day. And then for the entire day, we'll be talking about standards, how we can improve the processes, and what are the big topics right now. And this afternoon, we'll have a panel discussion where everyone is invited to react and to ask questions. And we try to put together a nice program for you today. So please, Phil.
Thank you. Hello. It's like the voice of God. Is it possible? Yeah, thank you very much, Pascal. Is it possible to make it echo less? Maybe move the walls out? What's that? What's the suggestion?
If you turned off the mic, we would be able to hear you, or would people in back?
You,
Hear me that loud?
How is that? Does that work? It won't work because of the recording. Maybe I'll just try the other mic.
Working with that mic? Yes? Okay.
Okay, that's better, yes? So, Pascal can be very persuasive. He asked me to come to this, and I said that I couldn't because I have another obligation at 10 o'clock. And he says, that's okay, we'll put you first. You can talk fast and then leave. And then I said, well, but I don't actually work on standards. I don't know anything about standards. And he said that that wouldn't be a problem either. So at least I am especially qualified to speak about things that have to do with ethical matters, because I come from a campus whose administration has none. So I'll try to make my small piece of compensation in this direction. So, yeah, I've always had kind of mixed feelings about cryptographic standards. You know, at one level, I know how important they are, and I've tried my very best to do work that would be useful for cryptographic standardization. On the other hand, the very first time I tried to do something dealing with standards, which was way back in 1995, I wrote a detailed set of comments on proposed IPsec standards, and it was not a good experience. The community that had been working long and hard on these standards thought that I was some strange outsider there to, you know, tear down and attack them. And, you know, I wondered later, you know, recently, if maybe it was my misreading of the community or something, and that I didn't know enough about this, the social structure operative in that standards community, in the IETF at that time, or if they really were kind of responding viciously. So I looked back at the old comments from the email mailing list to try and sort this out, you know, before I got here. And I think they were actually responding pretty viciously. Here's a fellow, Perry Metzger. You know, it appears that by failing to be as vicious as possible about Phil Rogaway's lack of understanding of the architecture of IPsec, that I have inspired people to take him seriously. And here later, comments from someone named Bill Simpson. It gladdens my heart to hear that a self-described cryptographers find that analysis impossible. Here I'm trying to argue that, you know, we need to craft cryptographic mechanisms in such a way that they're amenable to analysis, in particular by using standardized assumptions about that are sufficient to establish security. So this experience was enough to make me say, you know, I could spend my efforts elsewhere. And for the most part, I have. But trying to operate in a model where I would do work that would be useful for standards, but it would be the labor of others that would actually get the stuff into standards. And this also, I thought, would help steer me away from conflict of interest issues, because I think it is a problem if you are working to standardize that which you yourself have created. It's a nice model in which others create, that these two are distinct. This is supposed to make it go forward. Well, if you hear more of the talk, you'll learn that certain organizations may be interested in subverting this particular presentation. Okay, so in the talk, I have 10 observations. I don't know that we'll have time to get through them all, but 10 observations about cryptographic standards. I fear that they may have the character that either you view them as obvious or you completely disagree with them. But maybe that's the nature of things. So the first observation I would make, which would normally start as one, I seem to have lost a slide, is that cryptography is a social endeavor. And while we invariably emphasize the technical aspects of cryptography in our meetings and in our work, it's important to keep in mind that this field is very highly constructed. The subject that we focus on and the specific kinds of outputs that we produce are very much determined by the social context in which we are working. And I think this observation kind of pervades maybe all the others that I'll make. The second observation, I have no idea what happened to the slide associated to that prior one, if maybe it'll show up later, is that cryptographic standards are important. And I don't mean by this that they're important for just the obvious reasons that they enable interoperability or codify best practice or provide nice targets for people to work on and discourage people from rolling their own cryptography and going to standards instead. Those are all important reasons, but I'm referring to this issue, that cryptographic standards are central to the character of the communications infrastructures that we build. And code, as Lawrence Lessig calls it here, code really meaning architecture, the architecture of our system, it embodies the basic characteristics of how we can behave. In much the same way as law regulates human behavior, code regulates human behavior, or as that social norms regulate human behavior. Speaking more than 15 years ago, Lessig writes, code or architecture sets the terms on which life in cyberspace is experienced. It determines how easy it is to protect privacy or how easy it is to censor speech. It determines whether access to information is general or whether information is zoned. It affects who sees what or what is monitored in a host of ways that one cannot begin to see unless one begins to understand the nature of this code. The code of cyberspace regulates. So this is the real reason, I think, that standards matter, because standards are central to code in this sense, in the architecture of these global artifacts that we are building. And because code regulates, because it determines the nature of human interactions in such a fundamental way, cryptography has a strongly moral character. And I think there's a long tradition in cryptography that sees this moral character and is motivated by it, and there's another kind of competing tradition that wants to ignore this character and say that what we're doing is mathematics and apolitical. Ironically, I think many of the people who most strongly see the moral character of cryptography are not cryptographers, but like the people who identify with the cypherpunks or speak in their sort of language. Here's Julian Assange, but we discovered something, a strange property of the physical universe that we live in. The universe believes in encryption. It is easier to encrypt information than it is to decrypt it. I think you can understand what he actually means by that. We saw we could use this strange property to create the laws of a new world. Again, harking back to this kind of code is law idea from Lessig. Because cryptography has a moral character and shapes the political possibilities of interactions among us, I think it falls on us to figure out who should be benefiting, who we want to be benefiting, and who shouldn't be from our uses of this technology, what it can do to shape the characteristics of human discourse. And I certainly have an opinion on this matter and think that we need to be using cryptography as a way to empower individuals and to help ensure that organizations, organs of power, in particular state and corporations, don't become even more powerful, which in my view has been very much the political trend over the previous decades. One important aspect of this is ensuring that intelligence agencies and law enforcement agencies, often working hand in hand, to ensure that these organizations do not influence standards and practice any more than to the maximal extent that we're able to do this. And this is a hard thing to do, and I'm going to try and lay out a few possibilities for how we can minimize the influence of intelligence agencies and law enforcement agencies. One matter is simply being more vigilant. I think a lot of cryptographers ignore what's going on in the standards world, and we do this very much at our own peril. the dual EC DRBG scandal, I think, woke up many people, and they say, oh, so now we're supposed to attend to what's happening in standards. But this is not some strange, one-off exception. I believe we have demonstrated our lack of vigilance for years and years. GSM privacy has been broken forever, and we know that it's broken, and paper after paper has demonstrated just how broken it is. And yet, where are the cryptographers somehow who are speaking to power and saying that these standards and these mechanisms are simply not acceptable, that we can't have a cellular communication network in which anyone can buy a couple $1,000 IMSI catcher and start seeing, everything that's happening in some cell. It doesn't make sense. And I suspect we could go through example after example for how real-world security problems that actually are related to cryptographic failures are kind of hit-and-run affairs where, we write a paper and we move on, and the actual problem doesn't get solved. Bernstein and Tanya's paper about dual EC, a standardized backdoor, it did a nice job of emphasizing that it wasn't just NIST that was somehow manipulated or duped or something into standardizing this terrible PRG, but ANSI also standardized this generator, and ISO went along too. I don't understand precisely the social mechanisms that permit this to happen, but it seems to be a case in which the United States is having undue influence over these standards. We should be one voice at the table and not be able to set discourse to the extent of displacing a relatively mature proposal by something that was clearly engineered for subversion. Well, it's consistent. When it doesn't work with this device, it doesn't work with this one.
I did this.
You did that, and last time it helped?
Yeah. So last time I did that.
That was the one that mattered.
And I did that. And then it worked.
Okay. I think it should be self-evident that people working for the NSA or other intelligence agencies should not have leadership positions on standards bodies. And yet for years, Kevin chaired the CFRG, and I heard hardly anyone object to this. I think it's patently inappropriate for an organization whose main mission is enabling signals intelligence to be serving in a capacity where there's such ample opportunity for weakening standards in support of that mission. So I think one could try to establish rules in this direction, but I believe, like many things, social norms will work better than establishing rules. I think when we simply all agree among ourselves that points like C make sense, then it won't be feasible for people at intelligence agencies to play too strong a role on standards bodies. I think pledges might have some utility. I like the example from the Caesar call that designers have not hidden any weaknesses in the cipher that people pledge to. I don't think that such pledges are vacuous. In fact, I think that they can be expanded to assert the absence of conflicts of interest, where what COIs are in this case are clearly spelled out. The designers have used all of their knowledge and expertise to enable the goals as stated for the standard and not some other goals. It's not that people are somehow, who work for intelligence agencies or have other masters might not be willing to lie, but that but that people are uncomfortable lying in some way. And many people, in fact, won't do it in these contexts. And when we agree among ourselves that it's a violation of a norm, then when violations do occur, there's also more severe consequences for those that were involved. I would be very skeptical of things coming out of intelligence agencies. And right now, for example, one of the pushes that we see from the NSA is this gentle encouragement that we all be working on post-quantum stuff. As I will say later, I believe that standards can come too early or too late. And my own sense in these matters is that while post-quantum is a good thing to have some people working on, we should not be rushing towards standards in this domain. It is definitely, I feel, an area in which it is too early to be working on standards, and we have much more pressing matters to focus on at this point. Unfortunately, because I think NIST has done lots of good things for cryptography, NIST has suffered badly by the dual EC fiasco, and in some sense, this suffering is deserved, because NIST has had a close relationship with the National Security Agency. And until this matter is resolved in a stronger way than I think it's been resolved so far, NIST contributions are going to be suspect. There are some specific matters that NIST could take, I think, to improve this. If all communication between NIST and the NSA, for example, were through email and those emails were public, that would, I think that would help. Here's Revest speaking in his own remarks in the visiting committee report that NIST put out. NIST and the public should know whether there are any other current NIST cryptographic standards that would not be acceptable as standards if everyone knew what the NSA knows about them. These standards should be identified and scheduled for early replacement. If NSA refuses to answer such an inquiry, then any standard developed with significant NSA input should be assumed to be tainted unless it possesses a proof of security. Such tainted standards should be scheduled for early replacement. Okay, and this was the point I was making earlier. I think standards can come too early or too late, and we should guard against a sudden rush towards post-quantum. I think the password hash competition, PHC, may have been an example where we were a little too early on a standard. There seems to be lots of interesting intellectual work that is happening now, such that I think if we rerun this in a few years, we may end up with better results. On the other hand, I do think the competition actually led to a lot of this work. So it's not that it didn't have a positive effect, but maybe that its desired effect is not yet complete. In the design of standards, I think we need to be very careful of this adversary, which is complexity. Some standards come out nice and simple, and some come out incredibly complicated. And the complexity is very much an enemy to security here. And I think complexity has had too friendly a relationship with both cryptographic standards and with intelligence agencies. One of the problems, I think, that leads to complexity is that which emerges from committees is rarely simple. There are other approaches towards developing cryptographic standards. For example, individuals or groups of individuals contribute possibilities for the standard, and then the standards committee effectively chooses among such contributions and doesn't mess with them extensively afterwards. So, and I'm sure people who have worked in standards have other kind of alternative architectures to try and limit complexity. And I believe in many recent standardization efforts, simplicity is highly valued from the outset. From what I understand, TLS 1.3 already has this mindset strongly built in. And yet I want to say that simplicity itself won't solve these problems. Here's the actual text for mechanism 5 of ISO 19772. It's a authenticated encryption standard. It's 9 lines. You can't get a whole lot simpler, I suppose, than 9 lines of text. And yet it's completely wrong. I mean, if there was a mistake to be made, I think it appears in these, made in these 9 lines of text. Why did this happen? Well, it's not as though there's a subtle issue here. If anyone who really knows the literature or who's worked in this domain read these 9 lines, they would say that it is not, that this is not capturing encrypt then MAC, as the text somehow imagined it was capturing, not as formalized in those papers that formalize and study composition of encryption mechanisms and MACs to make authenticated encryption schemes. It just needed someone, the right person, to read it. And I'm afraid that that kind of proofreading actually doesn't often occur. Sometimes it seems it doesn't occur for kind of silly reasons, that the standard is developed and can't be distributed except among those who are working on the standard. That's not good. Standards really want to be free. They want to be free not only in the human sense of you know, a free people, but in the sense of like free beer, as Richard Stallman is fond of saying. Yes, standards really need to be free. So when you go to ISO's website and they want a lot of money for a standard, it's a real problem, not only for its kind of affront on Kirchhoff's principle, but just for decreasing the likelihood of cryptanalytic attack or serious review. Similarly, proprietary standards like GSM. I don't understand how we actually get hundreds or thousands of people working on a standard like this without it being leaked. Leak this stuff, yeah? It's good to leak. Or just post it to the web, yeah? From a different point of view, it seems very strange to me to contribute your intellectual labor to a standards organization and then have that, the fruit of that intellectual labor locked up behind some paywall or something. It seems to be an affront at multiple levels to be making cryptographic standards not free and easily available. Going out a little bit further still, so the question is, how can cryptographers use our domain knowledge to do socially useful work? And one answer to this is through standardization efforts, that I think this is an important way in which domain knowledge can be leveraged into social utility. But let me mention at least one other important activity for cryptographers, which is to try and be out there challenging the narratives that we're hearing so broadly, positioning cryptography as some kind of threat. And let me name 3 aspects of this narrative that I keep hearing. The no bus, nobody but us claim. So here's Michael Hayden, who's explaining that, that you want to have vulnerabilities in systems if they're the kind of vulnerability that only you can exploit. Maybe only you can exploit it by virtue of having you know, acres of computing equipment somewhere, so that the cost of exploitation is very high. Maybe only you can exploit it because there's some secret key that's well guarded associated to this mechanism. I think this nobody but us dream is really very much a dream and doesn't, has not been borne out by the history of no-bus kind of design. You know, 56-bit keys for DES was maybe the very first instance of nobody but us, but 10 years later even, that seemed a ridiculous choice to have made in terms of actually ensuring that the computation would only be carried out by some rich intelligence agency. And furthermore, the value associated to saying that it's appropriate that only those with enough money and power should be able to circumvent some cryptographic mechanism seems to me a quite inappropriate choice to be making. A second piece of this narrative, what in the United States at least is referred to as the going dark problem. In this framing of our cryptographic challenge, privacy is portrayed as a personal good that's inherently in conflict with security. Security, in contrast, is a collective good, and encryption technology has destroyed the traditional balance, and privacy wins. And because of this, we are now at risk of terrorism and pedophiles and money launderers somehow taking over the world. We run the risk of going dark, the world turning into a realm of nothing but locked closets. It's all a very scary kind of set of imagery, and it's all wrong. At so many levels, it's wrong. And yet, we have very few, I think, informed actors speaking out against the absurdity of this narrative. And I would like to see people much more articulate and inclined to engage in the social sphere than me, speaking out against this kind of crazy narrative. The third aspect of the narrative that I'd like to single out as something that really people like those in this room should be trying to speak out against is this belief, which seems actually well embedded in intelligence agencies, that collection occurs when some human being sees the result of that collection, when some human being puts on the earphones or reads the text that is determined by the data acquisition. As long as machines themselves are doing the monitoring and running the algorithms, well, then nothing has even been collective and no surveillance has taken place. This is crazy. You know, computers implement algorithms that human beings architect. They act as our agents in this regard, and have no agency of their own. And yet there's this kind of myth of the autonomous machine, of the computer with agency, which underlies this, this belief of the inexistence of robotic surveillance. I think we need to be trying to turn this on its head, that robotic surveillance is very much surveillance, and in many ways it's a much more threatening form of surveillance than the people with their earphones or reading the texts as they flow past some switch on the internet, because the robotic aspect of it allows agencies to deal with issues of scale, and therefore turns this problem into a much greater threat on democracy than it could ever be if this were implemented by human beings. And finally, I'll warn that it seems that when you venture out of the realm of giving some technical paper and speaking on issues like this, that it's very easy to be misunderstood, even by colleagues that ought to be able to read papers and understand what you're saying. There was recently a few paragraphs in this paper by Chatterjee, Koblitz, Manassis on Sarkar, which managed to get virtually every claim wrong that I had made in the moral character of cryptography paper I published in December. To read Koblitz et al.'s version of it, I'm some sort of enemy of fully homomorphic encryption and indistinguishability obfuscation, trying to strangle these poor babies, you know, before they're even properly born. And I don't know what to do about this except to point people to the right work and to say that, you know, it's maybe actually easy to say things wrong in oral communication, but when you write it down, you know, you can be careful about the words you use, and I really try to be. And so I don't think this can be a reason for not attempting to communicate even in domains where it is easy to be misunderstood. I hope you will be inspired to do so, because your contributions as a cryptographer are needed not only in the most highly technical aspects of what we collectively do, but in the broader social aspects of determining the utility of that which we do. Those are all my comments. A quick question or two?
So this is sort of something I've noticed working on standards involving competitions like SHA-3 and watching competitions, the AES competition earlier, password hashing, and now the authenticated encryption competition. I think the standards always come too early after a competition because competitions trigger a huge blossom of research. Mm-hmm. So it's like by the end of the competition, you know about twice as much as you did at the beginning. And so then maybe you can still get I think often can get a good standard out of it, a good result, but you've learned so much that at the end of that, you might then feel like, well, I wish I could rerun the competition just to do it again, because now we know more. I don't know a good solution for that, but.
Good. So I think you're implicitly suggesting that the competition and the standardization be severed, that there be.
I don't know if that's good, because the advantage of the competition is it takes, especially for the crypto community, it gets a lot of the crypto community involved in a pretty direct way. You have hundreds of papers published designing and then attacking and proving things about schemes or showing that somebody else's proof is wrong. And that's a huge, there's a huge win there, right? But then at the end of that, then you do feel like, well, wow, now we know more than we did when we started. So it's not obvious what the solution is there, because I actually think competitions are one of the best ways to standardize crypto algorithms when we can do it. But I do think you get to the end and you've learned more, and maybe you wish you could go do it again now. So. Okay.
Other comments or questions?
All right, thank you very much for being with us this morning. Thanks. So do you want to use your own laptop? Yep. Okay.